June 12, 1944, Northern France, 3:17 in the morning. The night was unusually still, so still that even the wind seemed to hesitate among the pine trees. A heavy mist lay close to the ground, swirling slowly like pale smoke rising from a battlefield long after the bodies were gone. And in the center of that silent forest clearing stood a concrete dome, half swallowed by earth and time, as though the land itself had been trying to hide it. Beside it, a lone figure moved through the fog. Klaus Ritter, 28 years old, an engineer drafted from civilian life, pushed into a world he never believed in, obeying orders he never dared to question. His uniform was damp from the night air, and the small lantern he carried flickered as though frightened by the darkness around him. He had been told this mission was simple: inspect the bunker, confirm it was ready for demolition, report back before dawn. Nothing more. A meaningless procedure for a structure that higher-ranking officers mocked openly. A bunker so strange, so unlike any other, that many believed it served no purpose at all. Yet the moment Ritter reached its outer wall, his certainty dissolved. He placed his gloved hand on the cold concrete. It trembled. Not from wind, not from distant artillery, but from something moving beneath the surface, steady, rhythmic, controlled. Ritter pulled his hand back instinctively. His breath came out in a cloud of white vapor. He listened. There it was, a soft metallic hum, a low pulse hidden deep underground, a sound that resonated through the soil like the slow turning of a giant gear. He felt it in his bones before he fully heard it. The bunker was not dormant, it was alive. Against his better judgment, Ritter stepped toward the narrow entrance. His boots scraped softly over gravel. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though crossing an invisible threshold into something forbidden. The doorway swallowed most of the lantern's light, revealing only a spiraling staircase leading down into the unseen. As he descended, warm air rose from below, unnatural and choking, carrying a faint scent of heated metal and chemical ozone. The hum grew louder, vibrating the rails beneath his fingertips. Ritter stopped halfway down the stairs, overcome by the sense that he was trespassing into a place he was never meant to see. Then the bunker shifted. A deep, resonant thud sounded from below, like the heartbeat of a massive machine struggling to awaken. The lantern quivered in his hand. A second thud followed, sharper this time. The concrete stairs vibrated. Ritter swallowed hard. He knew machinery. He had worked with turbines, pressure pumps, and early prototypes of rotating systems back in Berlin. But nothing he had ever heard, nothing he could even imagine sounded like the thing echoing through this bunker. He continued downward. At the bottom, he reached a circular corridor. The walls sweated with condensation, the floor was warm to the touch, and from somewhere ahead, beyond a sealed steel door, a pale blue glow pulsed faintly like a distant star buried in the earth. Ritter approached slowly. The hum grew harsher, rising and falling in short mechanical breaths. The glow brightened. The air buzzed with static, prickling against his skin. He hesitated, every instinct in him warned to turn back. But curiosity, dangerous, irrepressible, pulled him forward. As he placed his hand on the steel door, a sudden surge of energy coursed through the metal. Ritter froze. Not a shock, but something deeper, a vibration that felt precise, deliberate. Behind the door, something enormous rotated, something engineered with purpose, something powerful enough to shake the entire structure, something he had never been told about. The officers had laughed at this bunker. They had dismissed it, ridiculed it. But standing in that dim corridor, hearing a machine that should not exist, Ritter understood the truth. This bunker was not useless. It was not abandoned. It was not harmless. It was the cradle of a secret that had never been spoken aloud. And tonight, the secret was waking up. By the summer of 1944, Germany stood at the edge of collapse. The Third Reich, once confident in its vision of a 1,000-year empire, now watched its military might evaporate day by day. Allied forces had broken through the beaches of Normandy. American armor pushed relentlessly across hedgerows and villages. British and Canadian divisions advanced with growing momentum. Every mile reclaimed tightened the noose around Hitler's ambitions. Inside Germany, the situation was equally dire. Fuel shortages crippled the Luftwaffe. Ports and railways lay in ruins. Factories that once fed the German war machine burned under constant Allied bombardment. Cities were turning into rubble. Civilians fled through streets lit only by flames. And in the midst of this chaos, the Nazi High Command clung to a single, desperate hope: the creation of miracle weapons capable of altering the course of the war. These so-called Wunderwaffen were more than military projects. They were symbols of a collapsing regime reaching for salvation through technology. Jet fighters, guided bombs, ballistic missiles, many of them decades ahead of their time, emerged from laboratories scattered across the Reich. The leadership believed that if one weapon, just one, achieved the impact they dreamed of, it could force the Allies to negotiate. It could freeze the front line. It could buy Germany time. But beneath the surface, a second war was unfolding. Not a battle of armies, but a war of ideas. Rival factions within the German hierarchy fought fiercely for influence. The Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, the SS, all competed for funding, materials, and Berlin's approval. Scientific teams sabotaged one another. Engineers stole designs. Jealousy and paranoia shaped every decision. It was in this atmosphere of desperation and internal rivalry that whispers began circulating about an obscure SS research initiative, a project that didn't fit into any known category of weapons development, a project that demanded enormous quantities of concrete, copper, and electrical components, yet produced no aircraft, no missiles, no artillery. Something hidden behind layers of secrecy so dense that even seasoned officers struggled to access its reports. Resistance cells in France were the first to notice anomalies: late-night trains carrying unusual cargo, crates sealed with heavy lead, oversized metal rings engraved with complex copper coils. These components were always transported under SS escort, without insignias, without documentation, and always toward remote forest clearings far from populated areas. Soon after, Allied reconnaissance identified a pattern: strange domed structures rising out of the earth. Isolated, compact, circular, their walls built to absurd thickness. No visible defenses, no strategic value, no connection to radar or anti-aircraft networks. At first, analysts assumed they were abandoned fortifications, relics of some failed engineering concept. They even earned a nickname among British intelligence: the silent bunkers. Yet silence does not always mean insignificance. From Bletchley Park came the first breakthrough. A series of decrypted SS communications contained unfamiliar terminology: rotational containment, field stabilization, energy chamber protocols, and a code name that appeared repeatedly: Glocke, meaning the bell. More concerning was a single urgent directive encrypted simply but clearly:
Under no circumstance may the Allies acquire a rotor intact. The phrase set off alarms within the intelligence community. What rotor? Why was it vital? And why were the SS so desperate to destroy every trace before retreating? Meanwhile, among German officers in occupied France, the project became a source of ridicule. They laughed at the structures, mocked their unusual shape, and dismissed the SS engineers behind them as dreamers chasing fantasies. But ridicule is often born of ignorance. In the highest circles of the SS, the tone was not amusement. It was obsession. Funding continued to flow. Materials were prioritized. Entire towns were stripped of resources to feed this single idea. Then came the field reports. Odd, inexplicable, and easily dismissed unless viewed together. Local farmers spoke of animals refusing to graze near the installations. Metal tools left nearby overnight showed unexpected magnetization. Trees around some sites grew twisted, as if warped by unseen forces. And at least once, French partisans claimed to see the faint shimmer of a pale blue light radiating through the cracks of a bunker just before dawn. These anomalies, isolated and scattered, meant nothing to the casual observer, but analyzed collectively, they revealed a troubling conclusion. The bunkers were not defensive. They were not storage depots. They were not symbolic constructions. They were part of a system, a network, a chain of linked test chambers for something not yet ready, but dangerously close. And as the Allied advance accelerated, the window for discovery narrowed. Every hour brought soldiers closer to these strange structures. Every hour increased the urgency within the SS to either finish the project or destroy it. Within this fragile moment, on a single mist-covered morning, an engineer named Klaus Ritter stumbled upon the truth, a truth no one outside the project had ever witnessed firsthand, a truth the Reich was willing to bury, even if it meant burying their own men with it. For the stakes of this hidden project were greater than territory, than military pride, even than the war itself. It was the race to harness a force they did not fully understand, a force that, if unleashed, could reshape matter and erase life.
As Allied forces pushed deeper into France, the strange SS bunkers became more than curiosities. They became threats the Allies did not yet understand. And in wartime, what cannot be understood becomes dangerous. Within German command, tensions grew silently. Generals of the Wehrmacht viewed the SS Research Division with a mixture of disdain and unease. They had fought real battles, commanded real troops, buried real losses. The SS, in their eyes, played with half-scientific fantasies while soldiers died at the front. But the SS did not seek approval. They held a different kind of power, one rooted in ideology, secrecy, and absolute loyalty to Himmler. They did not need permission. They only needed results. And so, behind locked doors and sealed laboratories, the competition sharpened. Projects that failed were destroyed. Projects that succeeded were hidden. And Project Glocke, whatever it was, sat quietly between these extremes, consuming resources while producing no visible weapon. Rumors spread through German lines like whispers carried by the wind. Some said it was a machine to generate infinite power. Others claimed it could create a protective field around entire cities. A few whispered the most unsettling idea of all, that it was designed to manipulate the fabric of matter itself. But rumors meant nothing without proof, and proof lay buried beneath forests, guarded by SS units who followed orders with unnerving precision. Within Allied intelligence, the puzzle deepened.
Reports from the French resistance described late-night convoys that moved with ritualistic secrecy. Trains stopped without using lights. Cargo was transferred entirely by hand. Officers spoke in coded phrases, even among themselves. And every shipment included the same object: massive metal rings, polished to a mirror sheen and wrapped in copper, like the coils of an enormous electromagnet. London could not determine their purpose, but they recognized a pattern. Wherever these rings went, one of the mysterious bunkers soon appeared. Meanwhile, at Bletchley Park, each decrypted transmission fueled the sense of urgency. The messages were fragmented, but their tone was unmistakably tense. There were references to containment failures, to stability fields, to a phase threshold. Terminology that didn't belong to ordinary weapons development. The most unsettling of all was a single line repeated across 3 different communications. Do not attempt activation without full rotation. Lethal discharge radius unknown. To analysts, the phrase was chilling. It suggested danger not only to Allied forces, but to Germans themselves. Still, within the SS, the project continued to move forward, driven by ambition, by the promise of redemption, by the hunger for a weapon that could rewrite Germany's fate. But ambition often blinds, and within the project's inner circle, tensions began to fracture. Some scientists saw the machine as visionary. Others feared it was reckless, a device built on theories that stretched the limits of physics and sanity. A young assistant physicist later wrote in his diary, one of the few surviving personal accounts, "We are chasing something we do not understand. It is as if we are holding fire in our bare hands and pretending it will warm us, not burn us." Inside the bunkers, the conflict became more than ideological. Experiments failed, copper coils overheated, sections of reinforced concrete cracked from unexpected vibrations. Several technicians suffered severe burns without visible flame, as if the air itself had turned against them. And yet the project pressed on. Each failure was documented coldly, each disaster treated as data, each casualty buried quietly, their names erased from official rosters. All the while, Allied troops crept closer. By early June, the SS command overseeing Project Glocke received orders directly from Berlin. If the device could not reach operational readiness before the Allies arrived, it must be destroyed, completely and without trace. But something changed inside the command structure. A clash of wills emerged. Some officers insisted on retreat. Others demanded one final test, a last desperate attempt to prove the machine could work. Caught in this internal conflict were the engineers, men like Klaus Ritter, who had been denied knowledge, denied truth, denied the chance to understand what they were building until it was almost too late. As the front lines shifted and the Allies captured town after town, the SS became frantic. Trucks rushed supplies, generators ran through the night, orders came faster, colder, more desperate. And beneath one quiet forest in northern France, inside a bunker mocked as useless, a group of scientists prepared for the most dangerous test the project had ever attempted. They believed this test could change the war. They believed the bunker would contain the unimaginable. They believed they could control the machine. But the machine had begun to reveal its true nature, a nature they did not command, a nature they barely understood, and a nature Klaus Ritter was about to witness firsthand.
Klaus Ritter reached the bottom of the spiral staircase with his lantern trembling in his hand. The air was no longer merely warm. It pulsed with heat, rising in sharp bursts as if the bunker itself were breathing. Every step he took felt heavier, almost reluctant, as though the concrete floor resisted his presence. Ahead of him, a circular steel door vibrated with slow, rhythmic motions. A pale blue glow seeped through the thin gaps around its edges, flickering like ghostly fire. Ritter hesitated. He had inspected turbines, electric grids, and experimental generators throughout his short military assignment, but never had he seen a structure radiate energy so intensely and so unnaturally. He reached for the wheel latch. The metal was warm, too warm for a room with no power officially connected. His fingers trembled as he turned it. The wheel groaned. The door released a long, low exhalation of pressure, like a vault surrendering its last secret. Then Ritter stepped inside. The chamber was vast, circular, and carved entirely from reinforced concrete. Copper conduits twisted along the walls like serpents made of metal, but his eyes went immediately to the center of the room. Suspended from thick chains, bobbing slightly with each tremor, hung the device. Die Glocke. It was larger than he had imagined, an enormous double-ringed cylinder, coated in polished metal and wrapped in copper coils that glowed faintly. The rings rotated in opposite directions, slowly, steadily, with the precision of a heartbeat. And beneath it, the concrete floor was scorched black in a perfect circle. A low hum rumbled through the chamber, vibrating Ritter's chest. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Too powerful. The sound didn't merely echo, it lived. It resonated inside bone and sinew, as if tuning the human body to a frequency it was never meant to feel. Ritter approached a metal table where a stack of documents lay scattered. His lantern cast a trembling light over the pages. What he read stole the breath from his lungs. Test reports, measurements, warnings, casualty logs. Test 14, structural deformation in biological tissue after 20 seconds of exposure. Test 31, metallic elements liquefied without thermal input. Test 48, containment field failure. Chamber evacuation required. 2 personnel missing. Test 53. Radio expansion of unknown energy signature. Theoretical implications: catastrophic. Each report ended with the same handwritten note: increase rotational output. Ritter felt a chill run down his spine. This was not an experiment in energy. It was an experiment in destruction, destruction at a scale he could not comprehend. He stepped back from the table, heart pounding. At that moment, distant footsteps echoed from the staircase above. Harsh voices followed. SS officers speaking quickly, urgently. Ritter extinguished his lantern, pressed himself into the shadows, and listened. The officers descended into the chamber accompanied by 4 scientists wearing protective suits. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion and something darker, fear. "We test tonight," they whispered, "before the Allies reach Kane." Another shook his head. "The machine isn't stable. The chamber walls vibrated during the last run." "We have no choice. Berlin demands results." They surrounded the machine. One scientist opened a metal crate. Ritter's stomach tightened as he saw what lay inside. A sealed cylindrical canister filled with a luminous silver fluid that seemed to swirl on its own, defying stillness. They connected the canister to the machine. The hum shifted. It deepened. It thickened. It became a pulse. The rings accelerated, spinning faster, pulling the air into spiraling motion. Papers lifted from the floor, dust swirled in violent eddies. Static snapped through the chamber, stinging Ritter's skin. Then came the first spark. A blue arc of light leapt between the rotating rings. Then another. Then a chain of them, weaving a lattice of contained lightning around the machine.
The scientists murmured anxiously. One backed away. Another checked the gauges frantically. "Rotation is exceeding predicted limits," he shouted. "Hold it steady. We need full activation." The device shrieked. The room trembled. Concrete groaned under impossible strain. Blue light flooded the chamber, blinding, swallowing shadows whole. Ritter shielded his eyes. The air turned thick and metallic. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, then faded, drowned beneath the roaring hum until he felt as though his own body vibrated with the machine. A sudden crack split the air. The rotor slammed against its chains, jerking violently. Copper coils burst apart in blazing arcs. One scientist screamed as a beam of blue light enveloped him, his body convulsing, before collapsing to the floor, smoke rising from his skin. Alarms wailed. Instruments shattered. The machine spun wildly, no longer controlled, now something feral and unleashed. The lead scientist shouted, voice cracking with terror. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" They cut the power. Too late. A final surge erupted from the machine, a white flash that devoured the chamber in total brilliance. Ritter fell to the ground, ears ringing, lungs burning. A dense fog of smoke filled the air. When he looked up, the machine hung motionless, chains swaying. 3 scientists lay dead. 2 others staggered, faces burned raw by invisible force. The officer collapsed to his knees, whispering curses under his breath. Ritter stared at DEADLIEST, horrified. He now understood the truth. This was no prototype weapon. It was a force they could not control. A machine powerful enough to destroy anything around it, including those who built it. And if the Allies had arrived 1 hour later, if the machine had been fully activated, France would have witnessed a disaster far beyond the reach of conventional war. In that bunker, surrounded by smoke, death, and a machine that defied reason, Klaus Ritter realized he had seen something few men would ever understand. He had stood inside the awakening of a weapon the world was never meant to face.
When Allied troops finally reached the clearing 2 days later, the forest was unnaturally quiet. The air felt heavy, as though the land itself held its breath. They found the bunker door blown open, its bolts warped by heat that left no scorch marks. Inside, the walls were cracked, the floor blackened, and the machine, whatever it had been, lay twisted like the carcass of some mechanical creature that had died fighting its own nature. Only fragments remained: shattered coils, scorched pages, smoldering copper. Nothing that could explain the true scale of what had happened there. Nothing that revealed the intention behind its creation. The chamber still throbbed with a strange magnetism, faint yet unsettling, as if the memory of the machine refused to fade entirely. Among the debris, British soldiers recovered a few crumpled documents. Most were ruined by smoke or water, but one page survived long enough to be read. It contained diagrams of concentric rings, calculations of rotational velocity, and a handwritten note at the bottom that chilled every analyst who saw it. Phase 3 will reach operational range once containment improves. The term operational range sparked immediate alarm. To the Allied scientists who examined the remnants, it was clear this device had not been built for energy production, nor for propulsion, nor for any peaceful purpose. It was meant to release something: force, radiation, pressure, perhaps even a field whose properties remained unknown. But whatever it was, it had been dangerous enough for the SS to guard with secrecy, powerful enough to risk activation during retreat, and unstable enough to kill its own creators.
For decades after the war, historians debated what truly occurred in that bunker. Was DEADLIEST an early attempt at a directed energy weapon? A prototype for field manipulation? A misguided experiment in high-energy physics far ahead of its time? Or something far stranger, an attempt to bend the very laws of nature under the pressure of imminent defeat? None of the theories were ever confirmed. Most documents were destroyed by the SS during their retreat from France. Others vanished into classified archives, swallowed by governments unwilling to stir public fear. What remained were fragments of metal, of testimony, of rumor, and the quiet certainty that something extraordinary occurred in those last desperate months. But sometimes absence speaks more loudly than evidence. The bunker was demolished a month after its discovery. The forest grew back over the ruins. Roots crawled through concrete. Moss reclaimed the ground. Sunlight returned to the clearing as though trying to erase the memory of what had once pulsed beneath the soil. Today, nothing stands there but trees, wind, and silence. Yet for those who studied the recovered reports, one truth lingered long after the war. Germany did not lose this project because it lacked the genius to build it. It lost because it lacked the wisdom to understand it. The machine had been conceived in desperation, forged in secrecy, and fueled by the belief that a single invention could reverse the tides of history. But war breeds blindness, and in their hunger for a miracle, the architects of Project Glock stepped beyond the boundaries of knowledge into forces they could not command. Klaus Ritter, who vanished after the final test, was never heard from again. No record lists his transfer, no document records his death. Some speculated he fled, others believed he perished in the explosion, but a small number of Allied officers agreed on something quieter, more haunting, that Ritter witnessed what no engineer should ever see: technology stripped of understanding, power unbounded by conscience. And as the world rebuilt from the ashes of war, one reflection remained. The deadliest weapons in history are not always the ones unleashed. Sometimes the most terrifying are those that almost awakened, silenced not by enemies, but by the very forces they sought to command. In the end, the ruins of that bunker became more than a relic. They became a warning, a reminder that human ambition, when unmoored from restraint, can reach for things that should remain untouched. A reminder that knowledge does not always equal control. And a reminder that in the darkest moments of history, the line between innovation and catastrophe grows dangerously thin. The forest absorbed the echoes. The bunker faded into legend. But the memory of that machine, its hum, its light, its final violent breath, lingers like a shadow behind the war's most guarded secrets. And perhaps that is why, even now, nothing grows easily on that patch of ground.